All right, so get ready because we're going deep on this one, folks. This deep dive is going to be a little bit different, a little outside the box, even for us. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about blueberry inflation.
Yeah, that's right.
Blueberry inflation.
hmm
We're going to be exploring how a scene from a beloved children's book, well, somehow sparked a whole
It
thing.
really is. It's a fascinating look at how fiction, even something that's meant for kids can have these unintended consequences out there in the real world.
Yeah, and you've been diving into this for me. So we've got a few things to work with here. We've got some articles on blueberry fetishism. We've got a Wikipedia entry on body inflation in general, and then of course some background on Roald Dahl's classic Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Right.
I'm kind of nervous, not gonna lie.
Well, remember the goal here is to understand, not to judge.
Right.
Think of it like exploring a new culture. You might not adopt all of their customs, but you can appreciate how they see the world.
Okay, that helps. So for anyone who's drawing blank here, we're talking about Violet Beauregarde, right? The gum-chewing champion from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. She's the one who turns into a giant blueberry.
Exactly. In both the book and the two film adaptations, she ignores Wonka's warnings, gobbles down that experimental gum, and poof, she's a blueberry.
And that's where this whole blueberry inflation thing comes in.
You got it. For some people, that scene, is meant to be funny and a little bit cautionary. But for some people, it became, let's just say it sparked a very specific interest.
So how does a scene like that from a children's book, I mean, how does that turn into adult content?
That's where the psychology gets really interesting. That Kinkley article that you sent over, it dives into this.
Yeah.
It suggests that for some people, Violet's transformation taps into these pre-existing interests like BBW, fat fetishism, feederism.
Okay, so we should probably define those for anyone who isn't familiar with those terms. So BBW stands for big, beautiful women. That's an attraction to larger body types. Feederism is about the enjoyment of feeding someone, often to the point of weight gain. And then fat fetishism is, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that these interests aren't necessarily about harming anyone. They're about different aesthetic and sensual preferences. And for some people, that visual of someone swelling up like Violet, it just became associated with those interests.
I can see that. But it's not just about blueberries, right? I mean, the Wikipedia entry that you sent me,
Yeah.
it mentions inflation porn as a whole genre.
Absolutely. It can involve all sorts of things: balloons, air pumps, even special effects. Some people like the idea of being inflated, others like to see it happen to someone else. It's a whole spectrum.
So blueberries are just one flavor, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
There's even a subset that's all about the color blue, using makeup and clothing and stuff. More of an aesthetic approach.
Right. It just shows you how, even within these niche interests, there's so much variation. It's not a monolith.
Okay, that's helpful context, I think. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around the appeal. I mean, I get that everyone has their own thing, but why blueberries?
Well, the article actually quotes a few blueberry enthusiasts, and their perspective is really eye-opening. They talk about finding beauty in the transformation, about appreciating the fullness and roundness.
So it's not just about the blueberry itself, but what it represents.
Exactly. For some, it's about the idea of becoming helpless, immobile, completely given over to the sensation of being inflated. Others enjoy the idea of caring for someone in that state, helping them, admiring them.
Interesting. So there's a vulnerability aspect to it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And like with many interests, there are different ways to experience it.
So we've got the origins, we've got the variations, the psychology. What about the actual content? Is there really a market for blueberry porn?
The Kinkley article dives into that too. It brings up Rule 34, which basically states that if something exists, there's porn of it somewhere on the internet. Well, blueberries are no exception.
I think that makes sense. But it sounds like we're moving from something very innocent like a children's book into a whole other world.
It definitely raises questions about how fictional imagery can have these unintended real-world impacts, especially in the digital age where anything can be shared and reinterpreted.
The article actually mentions a woman, Azure. She's a webcam performer and found success specifically catering to this niche. But she's very open about the fact that she doesn't share the fetish herself. It's work for her.
Which is interesting, right? It shows the complexity of the sex industry, how supply and demand can drive content creation even for these incredibly specific interests.
Makes you wonder how many other seemingly niche fetishes are out there, each with its own dedicated community and creators.
And it circles right back to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. This book meant for kids. It sparked not just a fetish, but a whole market.
So we've gone from a book to all this. I guess that's a good transition to bring it back to the book itself, or is that too abrupt?
No, I think that's perfect. This idea of unintended consequences of supply meeting demand, even for something as specific as blueberries.
Yeah.
It makes me think about the other kids in the book. They all meet these really strange fates, right?
Yeah, Augustus Gloop gets stuck in the chocolate river.
Yeah.
Veruca, Salt falls down a garbage chute. It's not exactly subtle, but it's definitely memorable.
And maybe, just maybe, there are parallels to inflation in some of those scenarios.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, think about Augustus Gloop. You know, he's literally engulfed by that chocolate river, almost drowning in it. That feeling of being overwhelmed, surrounded, I don't know. It could resonate with the idea of inflation, of losing control as something envelops you.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. And what about Veruca Salt? I mean, she's all about demanding what she wants, pushing boundaries. Could her fall into the garbage chute, this chaotic descent into the unknown? Could that be another take on that loss of control?
Exactly. It's like Dahl even subconsciously was tapping into these primal fears and desires. And maybe for some people, those anxieties become, well, eroticized.
Wow, that's something. It's making me rethink my whole childhood reading list. What about the other kids? That Mike TV gets shrunk? Charlie wins the factory?
Right.
I don't really see the inflation connection there.
True, those are definitely different themes. But think about the Oompa Loompas. They appear after each kid's downfall, right? Singing those oddly catchy songs that are, well, pretty judgmental.
You're saying they're like the morality police of the factory.
In a way, yes. And if we connect that to the bigger picture, maybe they represent the kind of debates and discussions that happen within any subculture, including fetish communities. There are always rules, boundaries, even within something as seemingly freeform as desire.
That's a really interesting parallel. So Dahl might have accidentally created this whole world of subtext that's just ripe for interpretation,
Yeah.
even fetishization.
It speaks to the power of fiction, you know, to tap into our subconscious, to spark ideas and feelings we might not even be aware of. And in the age of the internet, those interpretations can spread and evolve in ways no author could have predicted.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. So we've got this children's book that might have accidentally planted the seeds for a specific fetish, and then we've got the internet, which allows that fetish to flourish and find a community. So it's like this weird cultural chain reaction.
And it's not just about blueberries, right? It's about how we as humans interact with stories, how our desires and anxieties can find expression in the most unexpected ways.
So what does this all mean for the listener who's maybe never even heard of blueberry inflation before? Why should they care?
I think it challenges us to be more open-minded, more curious about the things that we don't understand. It's easy to dismiss something as weird or gross, but if we dig a little deeper, we often find real people with their own stories and motivations.
It makes you think about the power of representation, too. The article mentioned how frustrated those blueberry enthusiasts felt about being judged, how they just wanted acceptance. It's a reminder that everyone deserves respect regardless of their interests.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder if maybe we all have something that seems strange to others.
Like, what if someone found out I collect vintage thimbles? They might think that's weird, but to me it's history, it's art, it's a connection to the past.
Exactly. And I think that's the key takeaway here. Blueberry inflation, as strange as it might seem on the surface, is just one example of the vast diversity of human desire. It's a reminder that there's more to every story than meets the eye.
So does knowing all this, the backstory, the psychology, the human element, does it change how you feel about the concept of blueberry inflation?
I think it certainly adds nuance and complexity to it. It helps
Yeah.
us move beyond these simple judgments and into a space of understanding, maybe even empathy.
I agree. And maybe that's the real power of a deep dive like this. It's not just about learning facts. It's about expanding our perspectives and challenging our assumptions about what's normal.
Because normal is a pretty subjective concept, isn't it?
Totally. And the more we explore these seemingly weird corners of the world, the more we realize that normal is just a construct. What's truly fascinating is the diversity of human experience, even in its most unusual forms.
Well said. And with that in mind, maybe it's time we turn back to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory itself.
All right, back to the factory. What else is there to unpack in that world of pure imagination? So we've got these kids, right? Each one representing different vices, gluttony, greed, entitlement, and they all get their comeuppance in these really visual, almost fantastical ways.
It's classic doll, right? Over the top, a little dark, but always memorable. And when
Yeah.
you think about it, those punishments often involve transformations. Augustus gets sucked up a pipe, Violet turns blue, Mike TV becomes a miniature.
Yeah, and those transformations, even though they're played for laughs, they're kind of disturbing when you really think about it.
Right, they tap into these primal fears of losing control, of our bodies betraying us. And maybe that's part of why that blueberry scene resonated so strongly with some people. It took that fear, that transformation, and turned it into something, well, desirable.
It's like Dahl accidentally created a blueprint for the fetish. And then the internet did what the internet does, took that blueprint and ran with it. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a fascinating case study in how art, culture, and technology all interact. You've got this pre-digital book sparking this very specific digital phenomenon.
Okay, so wrapping all of this up, what's the big takeaway here?
Mhm.
What do we want our listener to walk away with?
I think it's about the power of perspective. Something that might seem strange or even repulsive at first glance, it can become understandable, even relatable. Once you understand the context, the history, the human element behind it.
It's like that quote, everything is interesting if you go deep enough.
Exactly. And maybe that's the challenge we should all embrace. To be more curious, less judgmental, to ask questions instead of jumping to conclusions.
Because who knows? Maybe the things we find fascinating would seem totally bizarre to someone else.
Right. Imagine trying to explain your love of vintage thimbles to someone who's never seen one. They might think you're a little strange.
Oh, absolutely. But to me, each thimble is a tiny work of art, a piece of history. It's all about perspective.
And that's what makes the world so interesting, the infinite variety of human experience.
Well said. So to our listener, we hope this deep dive into the unexpected world of blueberry inflation has sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and maybe even made you think a little bit differently about things.
And if nothing else, we hope it's encouraged you to take a deep dive into your own seemingly weird interests. What are you passionate about? What would you say to someone who didn't understand?
That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this delightfully bizarre journey.
Until next time, keep exploring.